I'll never forget the way her voice cut through me that afternoon. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it was worse, it was soft, dismissive. The kind of whisper meant to sting without being challenged. I was standing in my son's kitchen rinsing out my coffee mug after Sunday lunch. Megan, my daughter-in-law, was at the counter with her friend, a tall woman with sharp eyes who'd stopped by for coffee and polite conversation. I was just a few feet away, close enough to hear everything, though they assumed I couldn't. Megan leaned toward her friend, covering her mouth slightly with one hand, and whispered, "He's old. He won't understand anyway." Her friend chuckled, shaking her head. "You're terrible," she teased. But Megan didn't laugh. She straightened up, almost smug, as if she had explained away my very existence in one sentence. I froze. The warm water running over my fingers suddenly felt cold. My heart didn't just sink, it cracked. At 68, I wasn't naive about the way some people look at age. I'd seen that quiet pity in strangers' eyes when I fumbled with a phone, or the way a cashier sometimes raised her voice unnecessarily when repeating a question. But never, not once, had I expected to hear that kind of dismissal in my own home, from the woman who married my son. I swallowed hard, forcing a small smile as if I hadn't heard a thing. My glasses fogged slightly from the steam of the sink, giving me the excuse to lift a hand and wipe at them. A shield, a mask. Because the moment I let her see how much those words stung would be the moment I lost something more important than pride. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Megan glance my way. She wasn't worried. She wasn't even pretending to be. In her mind, I really hadn't understood. Inside, though, I was spiraling. For a man who spent 35 years teaching history, who had lectured to restless teenagers about the causes of wars and the lessons buried in the past, I had always believed words carried power. They can shape a life, build someone up, or shatter them. And hers had just shattered me in a way I wasn't prepared for. I thought about my late wife, Linda. She had always been the bridge in this family. She had that warmth that could melt any coldness, smooth over any friction. She passed 3 years ago, and since then I'd done everything I could to keep family traditions alive. Sunday meals, bedtime stories for my granddaughter Ella, visits to school events. I thought I was welcome. I thought I mattered. But in that moment, Megan's whisper told me otherwise. To her, I was just an old man. Dead weight at the dinner table. A confused relic fumbling through the modern world, tolerated because of blood ties but not truly respected. I forced myself to chuckle softly as if recalling a memory. Linda used to love making apple pie this time of year, I said to no one in particular, setting my mug carefully in the rack. My voice sounded steady, but inside I was gripping those words like a lifeline. Her friend gave me a polite smile, but Megan didn't respond. She was already scrolling through her phone, conversation over. I excused myself a few minutes later, kissing Ella on the top of her head as she sat on the living room rug coloring. She looked up at me with her big brown eyes the same shade as her father's. "Grandpa, will you come to my recital this week?" she asked, holding up her crayon like a conductor's baton. My throat tightened, but I forced another smile. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart." That moment steadied me. It reminded me that no matter how Megan saw me, to Ella, I was still her hero. But as I stepped out into the cool autumn air, my heart was heavy. I knew something had shifted. I knew I couldn't unhear those words, couldn't go back to the way things were before. And though I had smiled and pretended not to notice, a storm was brewing inside me. Because Megan had underestimated me. She thought age made me blind, deaf, and powerless. But what she didn't realize was that years of living give you more than wrinkles and slower steps. They give you patience. They give you perspective. And they give you the wisdom to act quietly, decisively, in ways that others never see coming. As I drove home, the words replayed over and over in my mind. "He's old. He won't understand anyway." By the time I pulled into my driveway, the decision had already taken root. I didn't know exactly what form it would take yet, but I knew this. I wasn't going to let her define me, not as a burden, not as a fool. And so, with a calmness that surprised even me, I picked up the phone the next morning and dialed the number of my old friend, my lawyer. I had pretended not to hear, but I had heard, and I was going to make sure she never forgot it. I've lived 68 years, and in that time, I've worn many hats: teacher, husband, father, and now grandfather. But these days, the house feels quieter than it used to, almost too quiet. My wife, Linda, used to fill it with warmth. Her laughter, her humming while she cooked, the way she insisted on fresh flowers on the kitchen table. She's been gone for 3 years now, and though the silence has softened over time, there are moments when it feels like it presses in on me. I retired from teaching history at the high school not long after she passed. 35 years of standing at the chalkboard, talking about wars, revolutions, and the rise and fall of empires. It was rewarding, but also exhausting. When Linda was alive, retirement had felt like something to look forward to. We'd planned road trips, mornings on the porch with coffee, afternoons tending the garden. Without her, though, retirement became something else entirely. It became a test of how to fill the hours, how to hold on to purpose when the person you built your life around is no longer there. That's where my son, David, and his family came in. David's 35 now, busy with his career in finance. He's smart, ambitious, and works long hours. Megan, his wife, manages the home, though it often feels like she manages David just as much as the house. They have a daughter, my granddaughter, Ella, who's 5 years old and the light of my life. If you asked me what keeps me going these days, I'd tell you it's Ella. She has Linda's smile, and when she runs into my arms calling, "Grandpa," I feel a piece of my wife shining through her. I read her stories, help her build towers out of blocks, and clap the loudest at her school recitals. Every Sunday, I drive over for lunch. It's become a ritual, the kind of tradition Linda would have insisted we keep alive. But not everything about those Sundays feels as warm as it should. David and I get along well enough, though he's always rushing, checking his phone during meals, slipping away to take calls. Sometimes I look at him and wonder if he even sees me anymore, or if I've become just another obligation to squeeze into his schedule. He loves me, I know that. But love can look a lot like absence when your mind is always somewhere else. Then there's Megan. From the outside, she's polite. She makes sure my coffee cup is full. She thanks me when I bring over groceries or flowers for the table. But beneath the surface, there's something sharper, something I've started to notice more and more. A sigh when I ask her to explain how to use the TV remote. A tight smile when I tell one of my old teaching stories at the table. Subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but clear enough to me. I try not to dwell on it, reminding myself that family isn't always easy. Maybe she's just stressed. Maybe she doesn't mean it the way it comes across. But the truth is, each small dismissal adds up. And sometimes I lie awake at night wondering if I'm truly wanted there, or if I'm simply endured. Still, I go. I go because of Ella, because of the way her face lights up when I arrive. I go because family is all I have left, and I can't bear the thought of drifting away from it. One particular Sunday, before everything changed, I remember sitting at the table after lunch. Ella was curled up in my lap, showing me the picture she'd drawn of her family, stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. She pointed to each one, saying, "That's Mommy, that's Daddy, that's me, and that's you, Grandpa." My chest swelled with pride. For her, I wasn't old, I wasn't irrelevant. I was simply hers. But as much as I tried to focus on moments like that, I couldn't ignore the undercurrent. Megan had started making small comments. "Dad, maybe you shouldn't give Ella so much sugar." Or, "He doesn't need to stay so late. Ella has a bedtime." They were reasonable on the surface, but there was always a tone beneath them, one that suggested I was intruding. I told myself it was nothing. Families have quirks, and not everyone gets along perfectly, but deep down, I felt it. The tension, the unspoken judgment. And then came the whisper, the one that shattered any illusions I had left. Looking back now, I realize those Sundays had been leading to something. Every sigh, every tight smile, every dismissive glance was part of a picture I hadn't wanted to see. But when she leaned toward her friend and whispered those words, "He's old, he won't understand anyway," it was like a curtain being pulled back. Suddenly, everything made sense. It wasn't just about pie or sugar or bedtime, it was about me, about how she saw me. But at that moment, before I made any decisions, before the storm began, I was still just a grandfather trying to hold on to the pieces of his family, still a man balancing love, loss, and the need for respect. And though I didn't know it yet, those Sunday lunches were about to become the stage for a lesson Megan would never forget. When I heard Megan's whisper, "He's old, he won't understand anyway," something inside me cracked. I pretended I hadn't heard, of course. I kept my shoulders steady, my hands calm, rinsing the mug in the sink as though my heart hadn't just been split open. But the truth is, that single sentence didn't fade away. It lingered, sharp as glass, cutting deeper the more I replayed it in my mind. All week, the words echoed in my head. At night, lying in bed, I could almost hear her voice again, dripping with casual cruelty. It wasn't just the insult itself, it was the way she said it. Careless, certain, as though I truly was invisible, incapable of comprehension, and once I let myself dwell on it, other memories began surfacing. I thought back to Thanksgiving the previous year. I'd been carving the turkey just as I had for decades. My hands shook a little, I'll admit that. But the knife was steady enough. I caught Megan watching me, lips pressed thin, and when I offered her a plate, she smiled sweetly and said, "Why don't I take over, Dad?" Wouldn't want anyone to get hurt. Everyone at the table chuckled lightly, but there was no humor in her eyes. Or Christmas morning, when Ella ran to me first to show off her new dollhouse. Megan had laughed, but there was an edge to it. "She really does think the world of you, James," she said, then added under her breath, "For now." At the time, I brushed it off. I told myself I was being sensitive, that Megan had her quirks, that maybe I was misinterpreting. But after hearing her whisper to her friend in the kitchen, all of those moments snapped into place like pieces of a puzzle. This wasn't just stress. This wasn't a misunderstanding. She didn't respect me. The realization hurt more than I wanted to admit. I'd welcomed her into our family with open arms. I'd told David how lucky he was to have found her, how proud I was of the family they were building. I'd given her the same love and loyalty I would have given a daughter. And yet, in her eyes, I was nothing more than an inconvenience. The following Sunday, I went back for lunch as usual, though I carried myself differently. I sat at the table watching the family dynamic unfold, studying Megan's every move with new clarity. David scrolled through his phone between bites of roast chicken, barely noticing when Ella tried to get his attention. Megan tapped her nails against the table, sighing when I asked for the butter. "Here, Dad," she said, sliding it toward me. "Careful not to spill." It was such a small thing, but her tone was sharp, the kind of condescension you reserve for a child. I glanced at David, hoping he'd catch it, hoping he'd say something, but his eyes were still glued to his phone, oblivious. Ella, on the other hand, was all sunshine. "Grandpa, will you play blocks with me after lunch?" she asked, tugging on my sleeve. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, my voice steady though my insides twisted. I tried to focus on her, on the joy she brought me, but I couldn't ignore the growing weight pressing on my chest. Megan's dismissals weren't just occasional irritations anymore. They were becoming constant reminders that, in this house, I was unwanted. Later that evening, as I drove home, I thought about Linda again. She had always been the glue, the one who made sure every family gathering felt like love. She would have known how to handle this, how to smooth the edges. But she wasn't here, and the responsibility fell to me. I could confront Megan directly, but I knew how that would go. She'd smile, deny, twist my words, and David would likely take her side without even realizing it. I'd be painted as overly sensitive, confused, maybe even senile. And maybe that was the worst part of all, the fear that David, my own son, might believe her. I sat in my driveway for nearly an hour that night, staring at the darkened windows of my house. The place felt colder than ever. I thought about selling it, thought about moving closer to my brother in Oregon, thought about just disappearing from the Sunday lunches altogether. But then, I remembered Ella's face, the way she lit up when she saw me, the way she slipped her small hand into mine. I couldn't leave her. I wouldn't. And that's when another thought crept in. A dangerous thought, but one that gave me a strange sense of calm. Maybe I didn't have to raise my voice. Maybe I didn't have to argue or fight. Maybe I could show Megan, in a way she'd never forget, that I wasn't some senile old man stumbling through the end of his life. Maybe, just maybe, I could remind her, and everyone else, that I was still James Whittaker. And once the idea took hold, there was no shaking it. The conflict wasn't just between me and Megan anymore. It had become something larger. It was about dignity, respect, legacy, and I knew with every fiber of my being that I couldn't let this go unanswered. I've always believed in choosing my battles. 35 years of teaching teenagers will do that to a man. You learn that not every insult is worth answering, not every provocation deserves a fight, but you also learn when silence is a mistake, when allowing disrespect to pass unchallenged means you've surrendered something you can't afford to lose. That night, after another Sunday lunch filled with Megan's sighs and David's distracted silence, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the faded photograph of Linda that still sat in its frame. Her smile, frozen in time, was both comfort and torment. She would have known what to do. She would have softened the tension with kindness, reminded everyone of what truly mattered. But she wasn't here, and I had to face the truth. Kindness wasn't going to solve this. Megan didn't need kindness. She needed clarity. I pulled open the drawer beneath the table and retrieved my old address book. My fingers hovered over a name I hadn't dialed in years. Robert Hale. Robert had been my friend since college, and for the past 4 decades he'd been more than that. He'd been my lawyer. He handled Linda's estate when she passed, helped me manage the pension and insurance, and ensured Ella's college fund was properly set aside. I dialed the number, half expecting it to be disconnected, but his voice, warm and steady, answered on the second ring. "James Whittaker," he said with surprise. "It's been too long." "Robert," I replied, my tone firm. "I need your help. And this time, it's personal." We arranged to meet at his office the following afternoon. I barely slept that night, rehearsing what I'd say, second-guessing whether I was overreacting. But every time I thought about Megan's whisper, "He's old, he won't understand anyway," the doubt evaporated. No, this wasn't overreaction. This was self-respect. The next day, I stepped into Robert's office. The place smelled faintly of leather and old paper, a comforting scent that carried with it the weight of decisions made and lives changed. Robert, now in his 70s, looked older, but no less sharp. He rose to shake my hand. "James," he said warmly, "what brings you in?" I sat down, steadying myself. I need to make some changes to my will. And to the trust, big changes. He leaned back, studying me. Changes like what? I took a deep breath. I want everything, my savings, my pension, the house, to go directly to Ella. Not David, not Megan, straight to Ella, managed by a trustee until she's old enough to handle it herself. Robert raised an eyebrow. "That's a strong move. Are you sure? Most people would leave things to their children first." I shook my head. David's blind to what's happening under his own roof. "And Megan?" I hesitated, then continued. She doesn't respect me, Robert. She thinks I'm irrelevant, and if I leave things the way they are, she'll twist everything to her advantage. I won't let that happen. I want to secure Ella's future, not pad Megan's pockets." Robert was quiet for a moment, tapping his pen against the desk. Finally, he nodded. "All right. If that's what you want, we'll draft it today, but James, this will come as a shock to them. You're prepared for that?" I met his eyes. Shock is the point. We spent hours going over documents, making adjustments, ensuring everything was airtight. Robert explained the legal terms carefully, but I absorbed every word. My mind was sharper than Megan imagined, and with every signature I felt a weight lift from my chest. At one point, Robert leaned forward. "You know, James, you could always sit down with them. Talk this through first." "Save yourself the drama," I smiled, though it was a bitter one. "If she thinks I'm too old to understand, let's see how well she understands this when the papers arrive." When the documents were finished, Robert slid the thick envelope across the desk to me. "These will be filed officially, but this copy is yours. Do you want me to send notices to your family?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Send them directly. Certified mail. Make it official. Make it undeniable." As I left his office, envelope tucked under my arm, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: control. It wasn't about revenge, it wasn't about punishing Megan, though part of me relished the thought of her face when she opened that letter. It was about reclaiming my dignity, about drawing a line in the sand. Because the truth is, respect isn't something you can demand with raised voices or angry arguments. It's something you claim by standing firm, by refusing to be diminished. And as I drove home, the autumn leaves swirling around my windshield, I knew I had taken the first step toward a reckoning Megan would never see coming. The letter arrived on a Thursday. I know because Robert called me that morning to confirm the certified mail had been delivered. "James," he said over the phone, "it's done. They'll have it in their hands today." I thanked him and hung up, my heart pounding with a strange mix of nerves and calm resolve. For the rest of the day, I imagined the scene unfolding at David and Megan's house. I pictured the envelope, official and heavy, landing on their doorstep. Megan picking it up, her name written in bold type. Maybe she'd tear it open immediately. Maybe she'd wait for David. Either way, I knew the moment her eyes scanned those pages, the ground beneath her would shift. That evening, I received the call I'd been expecting. "Dad," David's voice came through the line, tight and uncertain. "We need to talk. Can you come over tonight?" There was no mention of Megan, but I could hear her presence in the silence behind him, like a storm cloud waiting to break. When I pulled into their driveway, the lights were blazing in every window. Inside, Ella was already in bed. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that comes only after an argument. I stepped into the living room to find David pacing, clutching the documents in his hand. Megan sat rigid on the couch, her face pale, the letter spread open on the coffee table like an accusation. "Dad," David started, his voice cracking, "what is this?" I lowered myself into the armchair across from them, deliberately calm. "That," I said, nodding at the papers, "is my will." Updated, Megan spoke before David could. Her voice trembled with barely contained fury. "You're cutting us out? Leaving everything to Ella? You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted gently, and I did. David shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "Dad, why? Why would you do this?" I met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "Because, son, respect isn't optional. It's the foundation of family, and when someone treats me like I'm nothing, like I'm too old to matter, I won't reward that behavior with silence. Or with inheritance." Megan's face flushed red. "I've done nothing but take care of this family. I've let you into our home every week. I leaned forward, cutting her off with a calm, steady voice. "I heard what you said, Megan, to your friend. He's old, he won't understand anyway. Do you remember that?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. "You thought I didn't hear," I continued, "but I did. And in that moment I realized something important. You don't see me as part of this family. You see me as a burden, and I'll be damned if I let you profit from a man you don't respect." David looked between us, his eyes wide, confusion and guilt written all over his face. "Megan, did you really say that?" Megan stammered, her hands twisting in her lap. It was a joke, taken out of context." He's exaggerating, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. I turned back to David. "Son, I don't want to drive a wedge between us. You'll always be my boy, but I can't ignore what's right in front of me. I've built my life on principles, on dignity, on honesty, and I won't betray those principles just to keep the peace." The room was silent. Megan's jaw clenched, her eyes shining with rage she couldn't voice. David sat down heavily on the edge of the couch, rubbing his temples. "So, that's it?" he asked finally. "You're really leaving everything to Ella?" "Yes," I said simply. "She's the future. She's innocent. She loves me for who I am, not for what I can give her. And when she's old enough, she'll understand the lesson I've left behind." I stood, smoothing my jacket. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't falter. For the first time in years, I felt utterly in control. As I turned to leave, I looked back at Megan one last time. She sat frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the couch, her knuckles white. "You underestimated me," I told her quietly. "And that was your mistake." I walked out into the night air, the autumn wind cool against my face. For the first time in a long time, I felt light, free. Behind me, in that brightly lit house, Megan sat trembling. And I knew she would never forget the moment she realized that the old man she dismissed had outmaneuvered her completely. When I walked out of David and Megan's house that night, the cold air felt sharper than usual, but it carried a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I slid into my car, sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel, and let out a long breath. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't accused. I hadn't lost my dignity. I had simply drawn a line and defended it. For days afterward, the silence from their house was deafening. No phone calls, no texts, no Sunday lunch invitation. A part of me worried I had gone too far, that maybe I had severed the fragile bond I still had with my son. But every time doubt crept in, I remembered Megan's whisper, "He's old, he won't understand anyway." That memory steadied me. I hadn't acted out of anger. I had acted out of necessity. The first to break the silence wasn't David or Megan, it was Ella. One afternoon, my phone rang, and her small voice chirped on the other end. "Grandpa," Mommy said, "you're not coming this Sunday, is that true?" The lump in my throat nearly choked me. "Sweetheart, I'll always come when you want me there." "Did you want me to visit?" "Yes," she exclaimed. "I have to show you my new dance. Daddy filmed it, but it's not the same. You have to see it in person. I promised her I'd come." And so, that Sunday, despite the tension, I drove over. David greeted me at the door, his face heavy with guilt, while Megan lingered in the background, stiff and silent. But Ella ran to me, arms wide, and that was all the welcome I needed. We spent the afternoon in the living room. She twirled and leapt, showing me her dance routine, her laughter ringing out like music. For a while, the tension in the air faded. I sat on the rug with her, clapping and laughing, and thought, this is what matters. Not the whispers, not the wills, not the bitterness. This. But I couldn't ignore the way Megan avoided my gaze, her lips pressed tight, her hands fidgeting with her phone. She was no longer smug, she was unsettled, maybe even afraid. Every time her eyes flicked toward me, I could see the weight of that letter pressing on her. She knew she had overplayed her hand, and for once, she had no control. That night, as I drove home, I thought about what legacy really means. People often think it's about money, property, the things you leave behind when you're gone. But it's more than that. Legacy is the story people tell about you, The respect you command even when you're not in the room, the lesson you pass on to those who come after. I realized then that Ella would grow up not just with a financial inheritance, but with an example. One day, when she was old enough to understand, she would learn that her grandfather didn't let anyone treat him as less than he was, that he valued himself enough to demand respect without raising his voice, that he believed dignity was worth protecting no matter the cost. And that lesson, I knew, was more valuable than any sum of money. In the weeks that followed, David began calling more often. Sometimes just to check in, sometimes to ask if I wanted to join him for lunch near his office. He never brought up the will directly, but his tone carried something new, awareness, perhaps even remorse. He had finally seen a glimpse of the disrespect I'd endured, and I think it shook him. Megan, however, kept her distance. When I visited, she stayed polite but quiet, her smiles forced, her words measured. She no longer dismissed me openly. Perhaps she thought if she stayed silent, she could regain ground someday, but I had no intention of undoing what I had set in motion. And strangely, I felt no bitterness toward her, only a quiet resolve. She had revealed who she truly was, and I had responded accordingly. One evening, as Ella and I sat in my garden, her tiny hands planting seeds beside mine, she looked up at me with a grin. "Grandpa, when I grow up, I'm going to be just like you." Smart and strong, I smiled, my chest swelling with pride. "And respectful too, right?" she giggled. "Yes, respectful too." I ruffled her hair, feeling tears sting the corners of my eyes. In that moment, I knew everything I'd done had been worth it. When people underestimate the elderly, they forget something important. Age doesn't erase wisdom. It doesn't erase love. It doesn't erase the right to be treated with dignity. I didn't rewrite my will out of spite. I did it to protect what mattered most, the future of a little girl who still saw her grandpa as a hero, not as a burden. And if that meant leaving Megan trembling with the realization that her words had consequences, so be it. Because respect, real respect, isn't given freely, it's earned, and when it's denied, it must be defended. That's the legacy I'll leave behind. So that's my story, a story about dignity, respect, and the reminder that age doesn't make a person invisible. It makes them wiser, stronger, and sometimes it makes them the one holding the quietest yet sharpest power in the room. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the way we treat the people who came before us, then I ask you to do something simple. Like this video to help share the message. Comment below. Tell me what you think, or share your own story about respect, family, and lessons learned. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Because in the end, stories like these aren't just about one man or one family. They're about all of us. And sometimes hearing them reminds us to live with more respect, more love, and more awareness of the legacies we leave behind.